Well, welcome to another Flip video. This is for chapter 6.1, videos A and B, and we'll be talking about labor unions. To start off with, it's really important to know that working conditions in Washington state and throughout the country in the late 1800s till about before World War I in the early 1900s wasn't the best. First off, people often worked for as little as $1 a day. Yeah, $1. What can you buy for $1 nowadays? Not a lot. They also worked for up to 12 hours each day, and at times they worked 6 days a week. Now, this was only for some industries, but this is definitely something showing you that the working conditions, at least for pay, was not good. Also, the work was extremely hazardous. For example, if you're a miner, a possibility could be that your dynamite blows early before everyone's out of the cave. You could also have cave-ins. Another thing that could happen is the air could get poisoned. An example of a danger in Washington state mines was in a Franklin mine, where 37 people died when a fire was actually inside the mine under the ground. Most of the workers got away. Some workers, though, thought they were safe, and in the end, they suffocated because of the smoke. If you worked in a sawmill, some of the things that was hazardous for you was unprotected blades with no covers on them, as you can see by this picture here. Also, the blades were automated. So you have these unprotected automated blades that are spinning like crazy and people's hands are moving in and out. Kind of nuts. Also, you can see a picture here of some dangers. There's really not a lot of safety precautions like there is now. Another danger, working like in a lumber mill, falling trees. As you can see, these gentlemen cutting the tree don't have any safety harnesses rigged up to the tree if it were to fall. Having dismemberment while working in the lumber industry, losing some digits, some fingers, and the death rate was extremely high. Now nowadays, when a worker gets hurt, they get to go on L&I. They get to rest, recuperate, go back to work. However, back in these times, workers had to go to work and work through these injuries, or they'd be replaced. They'd be fired and new workers would be brought in. The courts made it so that it was a worker's responsibility to show that an employer was negligent in safety, meaning it was up to the worker to go, hey, my employer didn't have A, B, and C at work. They didn't have covers for the blades. They didn't give me proper protection for my eyes. That's why I'm hurt. And if the worker couldn't show that, sorry, they're out of luck. They couldn't get any help. So it was really hard for workers to be safe and to make sure they were cared for if and when they got hurt. Let's now talk about the purpose of labor unions. A union is a group of workers whose goal is to improve working conditions. Now, working conditions of what we just previously talked about, the pay, safety. The idea was that there was strength in numbers when you negotiated with an employer, as these pictures so nicely show. And this picture down here. You have all these workers in the pond, and the poor business owner has nothing to do but acquiesce, to give in. In Seattle in 1901, there were 43 unions. Some examples would be unions for waitresses, unions for tailors, people who made clothes, unions for plumbers, unions for newsboys, young lads selling newspapers on the street corner. There's also unions for bricklayers. So there are unions for lots of different things. Some things about unions that you have to know, unfortunately, is that unions could limit who they allowed to join their group. They could limit it on men only. They could limit it on only certain races or immigrants could join their group. They could also limit it on only certain skills could join a group. For example, you could have a union where just people who worked with machines, machinists, could join. My question, and I want you to pause the video and think about this, is why would unions do this? Unions were meant to help people, help workers who back then, they didn't have a lot of help. So why would they limit who could join them? Please pause the video and think about that. Now, you may be thinking, Paul, how could the courts allow the unions to limit people? Well, in 1890, a court said that since unions were voluntary, unions could be as exclusive as they wanted. Interesting. Something to think about. What I wanted to talk about that I forgot to mention is the workers could get replaced if they were too hurt to work. So my question to you is, who would they replace these injured workers with? Who would they call in? The answer to this question helps us answer the question of why would unions limit who they allow to join them sometimes? Specifically, why would they limit different races or immigrants? Well, let's talk about the strike. Unions would go on a strike to improve their working conditions. Again, that's how much they're paid and the safety. They would stop work until their demands were met. Now, you may be thinking, why would they do that? They wouldn't get paid. Well, you're right. They wouldn't necessarily get paid. But you know what else would happen? No work meant a loss of production. You're not creating, you're not making anything, you're not meeting the demands of a customer. And if that doesn't happen, well, then businesses lose money. And in the end, most businesses are about the ka-ching, ka-ching, the money. So the hope is that with going on strike, businesses lose money, you'll get what you want. Some examples of what I found, first off, in Ballard, 12 sawmills went on strike so they could get paid the same amount as different sawmills did up in like Bellingham, for example. Also, the Newsboys, I believe in 1901, went on strike. And they went on strike because they felt it was their right for them to sell multiple newspapers. I believe it was the Seattle Post-Intelligencer wasn't letting them sell newspapers from other businesses. Well, the Newsboys went on strike, and you know what? The Newsboys got what they wanted. They were able to sell multiple newspapers, more money for them. Now, strikes sound all great and dandy. Businesses or management would not sit back on their hands and let these people strike. Because, hey, who wants to lose money? No one. So, in response, management first off would fire the workers who are on strike. Going back to this Ballard example, a lot of the workers ended up getting fired. And as a result, the management hired new people willing to work. Because there's a lot of immigrants, remember, coming in. There's a lot of people coming in from farms and all over the country looking for work. They would bring in strike breakers, also known as scabs. These are people they'd hire probably at a lower rate. A lot of times these were immigrants or African Americans. Now this angered the strikers a lot. And as a result, this anger started going towards the strike breakers or the scabs and turned into a lot of racial discrimination. There's a great example of this in your textbook with some African American workers who came to a mine and they didn't know that they were going to be strike breakers. Management would also get people blacklisted. Now this means that your name would be put on a list, and this list would be circulated to businesses in the area. This would be a list made up of people who would cause and lead labor unrest. So if your name was on the list, like say Betty Joe or Frankie Sue, you wouldn't get hired. Because they knew if they hired you, you would cause problems. Finally, the government seemed to side with the businesses. If things got out of hand, soldiers would be sent in and they'd take care of the strikers. Multiple times, martial law was brought in, which kind of allows the government to have its police and army kind of, take charge and do what they need to get things figured out. That's never a good thing. There were some cases in Idaho where some miners went out of hand and martial law was called multiple times. Which brings me to my last slide. Fear of labor unions. People were afraid, first off, that labor unions would destroy capitalism. The capitalism is a private ownership of business and of land instead of the government or a group of people. Lots of people are afraid that unions, that's what they wanted. They wanted to get rid of capitalism, which is what our country was built upon. Finally, I think people were afraid just of violent protests, as we can see this example here. If you Google labor protests, in 1900s, you'll find plenty of examples in our country. Well, thank you for watching this flip video. Please go to Edmodo to answer the questions.